What happens when the world is infected by a virus that transcends technology and organic creations? Do heroes survive, or do they succumb to the virus and threaten the entire universe? How will teenagers stack up to the deeds of their fathers? The DCeased saga is an excellent take on all these questions and tells the story of Justice League from an alternate timeline. Oh, and a small request. Consider becoming a member through the link in the description. It helps us in ways you can't imagine, and we'll soon start launching uncensored videos for members. And now, let's begin. Let's dive straight into the story. DCeased, the beginning of the end. Issue number 1, A Monster. Inside all of us, the series begins with Lois Lane, reminiscing about the events of a week ago, reminiscing the cracking sound of a god's jaw breaking, echoing throughout the atmosphere. She tells us that the moment Superman broke Darkseid's jaw, they should have known something was up. A god simply does not stand down after a blow like that, but Darkseid did. And what's more is the fact that he left the Earth when Superman ordered him to do so. No questions, no debates, no impending monologues, nothing. The heroes did everything in their power to ensure he was telling the truth. Wonder Woman trapped him in her lasso of truth, and Batman ordered him to leave while ensuring he couldn't deceive them using semantics. But Darkseid simply stood up and said, "I will not return to Earth. I have no need, for the truth is, I have what I came for." He then removed the lasso from his throat, threw it on the ground, and walked through a portal that led to his planet, Apocalypse. Lois reminisces that these words should have warned them, and these words should have sent them into overdrive, but none of them knew what his words meant back then. Only Batman picked up on it, and by the time he did, it was already too late. We then see Green Arrow and Black Canary look around with a puzzled expression when an ominous sensor on Batman's suit begins to beep. He pulls out the small device, takes one look at it, and declares that Cyborg is missing. Canary and Flash are confused by the surety in Batman's voice, and that is when he reveals that he is tracking Cyborg's whereabouts without the latter's consent. This begins a debate of morality amongst them, and it's the League versus the Batman. Barry is visibly furious, and he is racing from one position to the next, while asking Batman if he keeps tabs on all of them. Batman's reasoning is simple. Cyborg was a walking sentient weapon with apocalyptic technology running through his veins, and it would be stupid not to keep tabs on him. Wonder Woman is the one to put a pause on the argument, because they need to find out Vic's location as soon as possible. That is when Batman tells them that Cyborg isn't in their solar system, otherwise he would have been able to pinpoint his location. His tracker has a reach of 2 light years, and unfortunately it can't track Vic right now, and this could only mean one thing. On the next page, we are taken to the planet of Apocalypse, where DCeased, Darkseid's resident torturer, is busy tormenting Cyborg, who is strapped to a metal table and secured to it using dense metal spikes that have been stabbed through all of his limbs. Despite the strain and DCeased's attempts to break his spirits, Vic is awfully calm, so much so in fact that he keeps making snide remarks and jokes every chance he gets. Through his talks with DCeased, we learn why Darkseid brought him to Apocalypse. His eternal search for the anti-life equation is about to come to an end. He already found one half of the equation, and the other half exists inside Cyborg himself. It's the reason he was brought to Apocalypse, and this is disclosed to Vic by Darkseid himself. Vic, however, still thinks he can make jokes, and when he does so, Darkseid orders DCeased to cut his tongue out. Brutally, the very next second, DCeased plunges his knife into Vic's mouth and cuts his tongue out. As Vic coughs blood and struggles with his amputated tongue, we learn that Darkseid's half of the equation exists in the mother box he managed to obtain earlier, which is currently placed on Vic's chest. DCeased expresses his concerns over merging the two halves of the equation inside a living being like Cyborg, but Darkseid isn't about to stop now. To overcome this hurdle, he decides to control Vic's death while pressing the mother box into his chest and summons the Black Racer. Black Racer answers Darkseid's call, but instead tries attacking the Tyrant God. However, Darkseid holds the Black Racer up by the throat, and DCeased uses this chance to siphon his being into Cyborg. And so the two halves of the anti-life equation merged, and Darkseid was finally granted his dream, except that he wasn't. Something unexpected happened. Because they took a piece of death itself by siphoning off Black Racer's being, they corrupted the anti-life equation, and the first victim of this corrupted equation was Darkseid himself. DCeased, however, was immune to the disease, but unfortunately, Apocalypse wasn't, and neither was Darkseid. As the ruled planet and its ruler waged war against each other, DCeased realized what he and his master had done. To rectify his mistake, he sent Cyborg back to Earth through the boom tunnel, while the Black Racer fought and succumbed to Darkseid. Darkseid then targeted the planet of Apocalypse itself and blew it up from inside out. Darkseid attacked its core, and that was the end of it. However, what DCeased thought was an act of nobility was instead an act of stupidity, because by sending Cyborg back, he had also destined Earth for destruction. Cyborg landed in the streets of Metropolis, and he was instantly connected to the internet upon arrival. Within the next second, the anti-life equation evolved, and it jumped from Cyborg and fled into the internet. Vic realized soon enough what was happening. He tried to cut himself off from the world, but by then it was too late. The equation had evolved into a techno-organic virus and now was infecting humans around the world through the internet. Vic watched the entire thing unfold in front of his eyes as each and every person recording him while looking into their phones slowly began to turn. Speechless and deprived of his tongue, Vic could do nothing as the population of Metropolis began tearing each other's faces right in front of him. Right at this moment, Superman was at the home of Mr. Miracle and Big Barda. The two of them had just promised to go to Apocalypse and save Vic, but that is when Superman heard the screams through his super hearing, and he leaped out of the window the very next second. Upon discovering the state of Metropolis, its streets, and its people, Clark had only one name on his mind: John. We then catch up with Lois Lane and John Kent at their apartment. The latter is busy gaming with his buddy Damian Wade when Lois asks for her phone, and John finds it using his X-ray vision. However, just as he is about to reach for it, Superman enters the apartment and blows all the screens up. Phones, TV, game consoles, and anything that might be connected to the internet is disintegrated the very next second. And this is when we head to the Batcave and catch up with Batman. He has already figured out that the virus traverses through the internet, so he has switched to his backup analog camera system strategically placed throughout the city of Gotham. The Batcomputer runs on a local network that is cordoned off from the internet, which keeps him and the Batcave safe. But as Batman analyzes the spread of infection, the extent of this destruction dawns upon him, and things aren't looking good. Not for him, not for his son, not for the people of Gotham, and definitely not for the people of the world. 600 million people worldwide have been infected, and if this rate continues, the virus will infect everybody on Earth within the next day or two. However, this is when Batman realizes that the Wayne Manor is still connected to the internet, and to counteract that, he detonates the EMP for the Wayne Manor the very next second. Boom. With a loud electrical hum, the Wayne Manor goes dark, and Bruce is now left to scour the entire premises on his own. We then catch up with Superman and Lois Lane, who are busy assuring Damian that if anyone could survive an apocalyptic scenario like this, it would be Bruce. Damian's anxiety is curbed for now, but Bruce's has only just begun. We see him rushing through the dark of the Wayne Manor lobby towards Alfred, and his worst fears come true when he watches Alfred defending himself from an infected Nightwing while wielding a kitchen knife. Dick lunges and attacks Bruce, who barely manages to keep him at bay, but unfortunately, it is not just Dick who is infected. Tim has been too. Robin bites Batman's hand while Dick claws at his face, and in this moment, Bruce knows this is the end. He screams for Alfred to flee the mansion as he fights to keep his wards and beloved sons away from him while slowly succumbing to his injuries. Bruce lets out a final scream, ordering Alfred to leave the mansion as Dick claws the bat symbol on Bruce's chest while biting into his neck. Before I continue further into the dark abyss, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Marvelous Long Reads, and hit the bell icon so you never miss our explorations of the most extraordinary and chilling comics out there. And now, back to the story. DCeased, The Beginning of the End, issue number 2, A Father's Goodbye. Lois continues her narration in the second issue by telling us how during the initial days, the heroes still felt hopeful. They hoped that the virus hadn't reached the remote parts of the world, but this was mostly untrue. This is juxtaposed by Aquaman trying to look for survivors on a moored cargo ship only to discover that it was full of the infecteds. He was attacked instantly, and although he managed to leap into the water and escape, the infecteds were mindless enough to follow him and drown, but not before they seemingly infected him. We then catch up with Superman at Lois's apartment. Damian and John are now wearing their super suits, while Lois is trying to reach out to her parents. Through Damian and John's conversation, we learn that Damian has locked himself up inside. He isn't recognizing or facing his emotions. The only way he's getting through this crisis is by believing his father, Batman, can take down anything in the world, including the the anti-life equation. Lois's parents are fine, and once this has been confirmed, Superman decides to lead them all to the Daily Planet for safety, so that he can go check in on his parents in Smallville and save the world. Why Daily Planet? Because they still have their old deprecated analog broadcasting system. We then head to Gotham, where Harley and Poison Ivy are having a much-needed conversation they had avoided all these years. Harley is getting ready to finally express her opinions to the Joker, and Poison Ivy is doing everything she can to support her. After all, the two have loved each other all this while, and this anti-life apocalypse has finally given them strength and motive to express their feelings. Ivy gives Harley a quick kiss and sends her on her way. We then see Harley approach the Joker as he sits in front of his screens. She says, "Mr. J, I've been thinking, and I know you don't like it when I do that, and I guess that's part of the problem. Puddin', I'm here to say our life is over." We then see Joker's face and realize that he has been infected with the anti-life equation all this while. This was simply just some much-needed cathartic release for Harley Quinn, something Ivy knew she needed desperately before the Joker passed away. We then catch up with Black Canary, Green Arrow, and Green Lantern in the woods. After the defeat of Darkseid, they are taking a much-needed break from society and the digital world. Hal isn't enjoying himself, but Ollie and Dinah are trying to convince him to look on the better side of things. Hal is reluctant, and when Ollie ends up calling him a buzzkill, he simply turns in for the night. Jokingly, Oliver begins to strum his bow like a guitar, and we see Hal on his phone inside the tent. Moments later, Hal begins to snarl and growl, and then a huge green explosion blows both Oliver and Dinah tens of feet away. Hal has been infected, and although the ring orders him to stand down, Hal doesn't pay any attention to it. He begins to attack Oliver and Dinah with full force, while the latter tries to subdue him through non-lethal means. When Dinah's life is in danger, Oliver is forced to notch one of his lethal arrows, but when Hal sees this, he sends out chaotic tendrils of green energy towards him. Dinah panics and screams out loud, and this is the end of Green Lantern. Her sonic voice blows his brain out. We then see Superman, Lois, John, and Damian land on the Daily Planet rooftop. Superman stops them from heading inside because everyone they knew inside has been infected. He then hears Black Canary's scream and knows that he needs to leave his family for a few minutes. He orders John to stand guard and then flies away. We then see the Ring search for another suitable host after Hal's death and choose Dinah as the next host. She then turns into the new Green Lantern, and although she never wanted these powers, Superman arrives and tells her to believe in herself because they're going to need every superhero on their side. Oliver is still miffed about Hal's death, but he is sensible enough to hide his feelings for now. All of them then convene on the Daily Planet building, and as they get Oliver and Dinah up to speed, they hear a familiar voice from the Justice League communicator, Bruce's voice. Bruce tells them that humans aren't turning into zombies. They're much more than that. To put it simply, they are the anti-living, and they are stealing life. They are spreading death, and the cause of this is the techno-bio-hybrid virus that can transmit through digital imagery and blood. We then see Batman in the Batcave, currently wearing one of Mr. Freeze's suits. He then breaks the truth to them all. He was able to learn all of this by analyzing his blood because his own sons infected him. Mr. Freeze's suit is helping slow down his metabolism, but it won't be long before he succumbs to the virus. Though Clark tries to fight back, Bruce forces him to see the truth. This is the end of him. He is going to have to care for Damian, and he is going to have to kill every carrier on Earth if humanity is to survive this anti-life apocalypse. As the rest of them struggle with the fact that they're going to lose the legendary Batman to this virus, Bruce says his final goodbye to Damian. He tells Damian how much he loves him, and that Alfred will have a special gift for him from Bruce the next time they meet. He then says, "I'm sorry I won't be there to see you in," and then Bruce begins to cough and choke, and Alfred knows it's over. He orders the Batcomputer to end the transmission and then cocks the shotgun. A smiling and infected Batman breaks the Mr. Freeze helmet and beelines for Alfred, but the ever-faithful butler and father figure calmly takes aim and says, "It shouldn't have ended this way, not for you, I'm sorry, son," and then bang. DCeased, the beginning of the end, issue number 3, crippled by morality. And so, Lois continues her narration, and the theme of her message this time is the realization that the world had come to rely on superheroes too much, and no one had contingencies about what the world would do if the heroes ever turned against them. No one but Batman, and unfortunately, Batman was now dead. We start by catching up with Alfred, who is wishing his sons the last goodbye. Time is running out, and unfortunately, he doesn't have enough time time to bury Bruce, Dick, and Tim on the estate. He clutches the briefcase intended for Damien tightly and then leaves the Batcave in the Batplane. Once in the air, Alfred's mourning turns into rage, and he starts by bombing the infecteds in the streets of Gotham. We then catch up with Harley, who is once again running away from the Joker and doing what she has done all her life. But when she manages to grab a gun from a nearby bystander who was just attacked, she decides to make her stand. She's ready to face her monster, and so she stands up, turns around, cocks the shotgun, and blows the Joker's guts out. And then, when Harley realizes that Joker is no more, she feels relieved. She feels free for the first time in years. However, this freedom is quickly curbed when she hears loud thuds in front of her. She opens her eyes only to realize that she will now have to do some bird hunting, and that's because the birds of prey are here, and they're all infected. Back on the Daily Planet rooftop, we see John try to keep Damien company, while the latter tries to bottle up all his emotions, just like his father. Clark, Lois, Ollie, and Dinah are very concerned about the kid, but unfortunately, time is limited. Especially for Superman, he needs to reach Smallville. But before he can do that, he needs to secure the Daily Planet. And so without a word or sound, Superman leaps into action and methodically takes every infected out of the building. Every infected that was once a colleague, that was once a friend, is methodically plucked out of the building and placed in the street over the next few seconds. Once that is done, Superman crushes them all using the Daily Planet globe at the top of the building. And then Superman hugs his family and leaves them under the care of Green Arrow and Green Canary. However, this is juxtaposed by Lois's ominous words that tell us that no one knew back then that they were making promises they couldn't keep. We then see Mara and Tempest busy with their training when suddenly the water around them begins to darken. And no, it's not the sun setting over the horizon. It's the infected Aquaman beelining for them while killing every Atlantean in sight. The water has been darkened with the blood of their fellow citizens. Tempest leaps into action but makes his first and biggest mistake when he dives straight into the blood. He too gets infected, and when they all try to attack Mara, she musters all her power to repel them away and makes her escape. Lois then tells us that Superman couldn't stop himself from helping the innocents while on his way to Smallville. He saved a family, a school bus, and even crossed paths with Black Lightning and his family in a helicopter. They were busy fighting an infected Clayface, who Superman managed to kill instantly. He then asked Black Lightning to head to the Daily Planet and then made his way to Smallville. However, by then it was too late. Pa Kent had been infected, and Ma Kent barely managed to lock him in the barn's basement. Clark dejectedly faced his infected father, while the latter hungered for his blood, but he never had the heart to kill him. He locked him in the basement again and then left the farm with her in his arms. This isn't their home anymore, and that thing in the basement wasn't Pa Kent, something Ma Kent is struggling to accept as they fly away. DCeased, the beginning of the end, issue number 4, ill-prepared contingencies. We now head to Washington, D.C., where the military is carrying out its own plague protocol to combat the anti-life equation. Plague Protocol B is currently underway, overlooked by Amanda Waller and Captain Atom. Things aren't looking good because this protocol involved sending the Atom into an infected's body to gather pertinent information to help them synthesize a cure. However, it has been over a few hours, and Ray Palmer has still not returned, and this has forced the military to switch to more drastic measures. Captain Atom, one of the strongest beings on Earth, is to now wipe out all of the infecteds while being assisted by Waller. Captain Atom takes to the sky and begins cleaning up the streets, but that is when something unexpected happens. The virtually immortal Captain Atom, with impenetrable delustal skin, is taken down by one of his own, because we then see that Ray Palmer, aka Atom, was infected when trying to find a cure. And the anti-life equation was smart enough to use his powers against Captain Atom himself. Ray attacked Captain Atom's heart, and that was going to be the end of him. With a swift move, the anti-life equation had taken down two of the biggest hopes of humanity within a matter of minutes. Superman returns with Ma Kent on the Daily Planet rooftop, and the family mourns Pa Kent getting infected. Dinah and Ollie then stop Clark from leaving them again. They can't risk someone as powerful as him getting infected. Clark tries to curb their worries by telling them that he has been using X-ray vision since the infection started, and they reluctantly give in. Damian then tells them that they need more allies if they are to fight this apocalypse, and so Lois begins using the analog broadcasting equipment to send out a call over all the frequencies. She urges the citizens and survivors to stay safe while rallying all those who have the power to help to convene on the Daily Planet rooftop. Her call is heard far and wide, heard by Wonder Girl and Beast Boy, Hawk Girl, and even Lex and Lena Luthor. Her call even manages to reach Themyscira, where Mira is taking refuge under Queen Hippolyta, while Diana leaves her abode to help Earth instead. We then see Superman and Green Canary rendezvous with Flash and Kid Flash in Keystone City. They have been hiding and waiting ever since the apocalypse started, all due to the mysterious instructions of Batman. Batman contacted them before anyone else and instructed them to hide because if either of them got infected, the anti-life equation would use them to spread the infection at the speed of light. Superman and Dinah promise to keep them safe, and we then head to Gotham to catch up with Harley, who is fighting the Birds of Prey. She is about to get overpowered when she runs out of slugs, but then Poison Ivy saves her in the nick of time. Ivy leads Harley to safety, and only the two of them seem to be enjoying this apocalypse because their love is blossoming. Back on the Daily Planet rooftop, John can hear a mysterious rumbling in the distance, and by the time he can warn the others about it, it's already too late. Giganta is here in her massive form, and although the heroes do their best to keep her at bay, despite all the injuries, she is able to close the distance rapidly. That is when two missiles stagger her and draw her attention away, and much to Damian's relief, it's the Batplane. However, he screams out for his dad when Giganta manages to hit the Batplane, but thankfully Black Canary is able to use her powers to save the plane. She, Superman, and the rest of them are here, and Clark wastes no time in taking down Giganta. This is when Wonder Woman shows up and tries to finish the job, but sadly, Clark still has hope and doesn't want to kill Giganta yet. Bruce called them infected, and so there still might be a way to save them, but the very next second, their conversation is interrupted by a loud blast and the sound of pieces of flesh raining down on the asphalt. Vic is here, and he has just blown out Giganta's brains. Vic tells Clark and Dinah that the anti-life equation is much more complex. The infected aren't alive anymore. He then pulls them aside for a much-needed talk, and we then catch up with Damian, who is being greeted by Alfred. Alfred apologizes to Damian, opens the briefcase, and then offers the contents to him. It's Bruce's next-gen batsuit and mysterious thumb drives with the symbols of each Omega-level Justice League member. And as Alfred offers this to Damian, he says, "He said you were worthy of it. He said that he was proud of you and that he should have told that to you every day." All the emotions that Damian was trying to bury finally break out, and he weeps into Alfred's arms as the latter hugs him. For the first time, it seems, one of the Waynes won't be dealing with the death of his parents negatively anymore. Black Lightning gives contact lenses to both the Flashes to blur their vision to prevent them from getting infected, and that is when Vic addresses all of them and tells them more about the infected. He tells them that the anti-life infecteds are attracted to life, and they won't stop until they're all dead, which is why they need to move, because the Daily Planet isn't safe anymore. However, they are distracted by Hawkgirl falling from the sky. Her wings were on fire, and she was barely able to make it here. She tells them about Captain Atom and how he's about to go nuclear in Washington, D.C. Clark and Diana fly at the speed of light and try to get Captain Atom to space the very next second, but sadly, they're too late. Boom. With a loud explosion, Captain Atom detonates, and the sound is heard across the planet. The consequences? Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Metropolis are wiped out and atomized in an instant. Black Lightning holds his children close to his heart and weeps as all of them prepare for their imminent death. DCeased, The Beginning of the End, Issue number 5, Unstoppable Force versus Immovable Object. The comic begins with a stunned Superman and Wonder Woman staring at the destruction left behind by Captain Atom's nuclear atomization. The entire city of Washington, D.C. is nothing but barren, devastated ground, and as Superman looks in the distance, he realizes he can't see the skyline of Metropolis anymore. The two of them rush towards Superman's city, and thankfully, upon reaching, they find that everything everyone on the Daily Planet rooftop was saved, thanks to the quick thinking of Green Canary. She encased them in a protective bubble of green energy, seconds before the explosion reached them. We then see Lex Luthor call out to Superman, only this time he isn't here to fight. He too mourns the loss of Metropolis. After all, it was his city too. Lois then tells us that the heroes destroyed every trace of the internet over the next few days. Flash destroyed server centers in every country, Wonder Woman took care of all the satellites, and Superman and Superboy destroyed the undersea communication cables. Wonder Woman then convinced Themyscira to open its borders for the first time in history in order to provide a sanctuary for the humans. Queen Hippolyta reluctantly agreed, and so Wonder Woman, Superman, and Mira lifted more landmass from the seafloor to extend the borders of Themyscira and make room for the incoming humans. Similarly, Gotham too had been turned into a sanctuary, albeit this time the culprit was a different being, the self-proclaimed protector of nature, Poison Ivy. Damian led the delegation to Gotham alongside Ollie and Dinah, only to discover that the entire city had been encased in vines. Damian demands to be the one doing the talking, and Dinah and Ollie reluctantly agree. As they approach the borders of Ivy's sanctuary, they are attacked by an infected Killer Croc. Before they can fight back, Killer Croc is killed by the vines around them, and once done, they proceed to restrain Batboy, Green Arrow, and Green Canary. Green Canary is about to cut them down, but Damian orders her not to harm the plants. In the land of Poison Ivy, that is a grave mistake you don't want to commit, even if you're wielding the powers of the Green Lantern. Ivy and Harley then show up, and it seems that this sanctuary is sort of a wedding gift for Harley, especially the death wall adorning the bodies of all those who dared to try and harm them. When Ivy taunts Damian about being a boy in bat costume, he reveals that Bruce is dead, taking both Ivy and Harley by surprise. They let their guard down, and they all end up having a civil conversation. Turns out Harley too has been nagging Ivy to open up the sanctuary to the world so that surviving humans can find a safe space in Gotham. And now that Damian and the rest are here requesting the same thing, Ivy reluctantly agrees. But she only has one condition. Any human that harms the plants will be expelled and fed to the anti-living infecteds. Damian readily agrees, so the terms are set. Once the sanctuaries were secured, the heroes made Superman's Fortress of Solitude their home base. However, too many heroes in one location can prove to be a dicey decision, because someone like Lex Luthor doesn't really have great communication skills. He and Cyborg have been busy designing blueprints for arcs that will carry the remaining human population out into space, and this sparks a debate between him and Superman. Superman doesn't want to abandon Earth, but Luthor tells him that they have no choice right now. Maybe they can think of reclaiming the Earth in the future, but they need to leave right now. Ma Kent tries to control Clark and makes him see the truth, but Lex uses this moment to make a snide remark towards Clark. He says, "Heh, mighty Superman, losing 2 worlds in 1 lifetime, how careless." And then wham! With a loud crack, Lois approaches Lex and breaks his nose the very next second. She tells him that he shouldn't overstay his welcome because none of the heroes like him, and so he should tread lightly. The 2 teenagers in the room closely watched all of this, Damian and John, and this makes Lois realize she has set a really bad example for them. But hey, one's the son of Superman and the other the son of Batman. They don't need to be told that violence should be the last resort. And so the next few weeks went as planned, without a hitch. The sanctuaries were filled, and the process of building the arcs was underway. Lois tells us that this time was oddly peaceful, and it gave them enough space to mourn those who had lost their lives. We then see Dinah, Ollie, and Barry pay their homage to Hal while standing around the ring. However, this is when Lois speculates that they made their mistake. They shouldn't have let their guard down, because nothing bad had happened in the last few weeks. Instead, they should have expected the anti-life equation to be planning something big, because a day or 2 later, what began as a slight background buzz turned into a raging scream in all of their minds. And then they were attacked by an infected Martian manhunter, who started by ripping Lex Luthor in half. He then attacked and infected Barry, and went for the rest of them once that was done. Of course, the heroes managed to kill him easily, but by then the damage had been done, and the next part of the anti-life equation's plan was underway. Barry had been infected and was currently running around the world trying to infect any and everyone he could get his hands on. Superman stops Wally and tells him to follow Bruce's orders. Barry Barry has already been infected and they can't risk him getting infected too. It was time Clark stepped up, and although he wasn't as fast as Barry, he didn't need to be. He had a plan. We then see Barry running through the streets of various countries while infecting innocent survivors. And this is when Superman reveals his plan. He doesn't need to chase Barry across the world. He simply needs to go in the opposite direction and face him head on. The impact splits Barry in half, but when Superman turns around to apologize to his friend, he looks down and realizes that the force of the impact was enough to penetrate his skin, and Barry's broken ribs are currently sticking out of his torso. And so Superman uses his super speed and enhanced super immunity to his advantage to say one last goodbye to his friends and make his last requests. He asks Wally to connect Ma Kent, Lois, and John to the Speed Force. He then wishes his family a hearty goodbye, thanks his mother for giving him a home on a planet that wasn't his, thanks her and Pa Kent for teaching him all the values that made a Superman out of him. He then thanks his wife for choosing him and wishes his son a heavy goodbye. He wishes he could leave John in better circumstances, but unfortunately, all of Superman's responsibilities are now on him. Teary-eyed, they both hug, and Clark's last words are telling John that he has always been and always will be proud of John. We then see Superman fly up into space and away from Earth, desperately trying to kill himself before the infection took over. Still, unfortunately, maybe he took too much time saying goodbye to the people he loved because the infection takes over, only a few miles outside Earth's orbit. Superman recoils in pain as heat vision shoots out of his eyes in exorbitant amounts. DCeased, The Beginning of the End, issue number 6. It speaks. And so begins the assault of the anti-life equation through Superman, and the first thing it does is to crush 432nd Park Avenue, the largest residential building in the world. Citizens look up at Superman's arrival. Hopefully, kids stare up at him in awe, but by the time they realize he is hurtling towards them at supersonic speeds, it's already too late. The building is crushed in a second, and this is when the heroes begin considering all the options at their disposal back at the Fortress of Solitude. Vic wants to leave with the Earth's population in the Arks, but Diana tells him that Superman will follow them to the ends of the universe. They need to kill him first. This is when Damian pulls out the Superman-labeled thumb drive that Bruce had bestowed upon him. Turns out, all these thumb drives contain plans of how to kill the top-tier members of the League in case they ever defected. Oliver is pissed that Bruce never considered him a top-tier threat to develop a plan against him, and Dinah teases him about this childish jealousy. Superman's apocalyptic plan by Bruce is simple. A simple piece of kryptonite powdered and formulated into a suppressing gas. The piece of kryptonite is already in Damian's belt, which Bruce himself stocked, but this is when Wonder Woman intervenes and tells them that slowing down Superman won't be enough. They need to kill Superman, and Bruce wasn't the only one with contingency plans for his teammates. Diana grabs the piece of kryptonite and leaves along with Green Canary and Cyborg in tow. She promises to take care of Superman and orders the rest of them to focus on getting everyone aboard the Arks. And so the work begins. Diana combines the piece of kryptonite with the sword of Athena at Kal-El's forge in the Fortress of Solitude. Diana and her mother had devised this plan when they realized that Clark was vulnerable to kryptonite and magic. Combining the two was something as though fate had destined for this moment. Athena was the goddess of war, and this is their biggest war. She was the goddess of craft, and they have just fused mythology with a piece of rock from a world that no longer exists. And lastly, she was the goddess of mathematics, and currently, they're fighting an equation, and this weapon seems to be fitting considering their current scenario. Green Canary, Cyborg, and Wonder Woman take to the sky once the sword has been forged, while the rest of the heroes rescue surviving humans from the sanctuaries in Gotham and Themyscira. The problem they face is the fact that each arc can only carry 7 million, and unfortunately for them, much more have survived. They are able to empty the Gotham sanctuary, and this is when we see that Harley and Poison Ivy decide to stay behind on Earth. Ivy isn't ready to leave the green, and there is no chance in the world that Harley is abandoning Ivy, and so they watch hand in hand as the Ark leaves Gotham. The onboarding in Themyscira is going as planned with the help of Wonder Girl and the rest of the Amazonians, but that is when hell breaks loose when they spot a huge storm on the horizon, which turns out to be the infected Aquaman commandeering the Kraken. The threat baffles and scares every queen currently overseeing the island. Hippolyta, Mira, Philippus, they're all scared. How will they handle Aquaman the god of sea? How will they stop the Kraken? But that is when something unexpected happens. A whizzing sound through the ear catches their attention momentarily, and then all of a sudden Aquaman gets stabbed with an arrow through the eye. And that's the end of the god of sea, and they can thank Green Arrow for taking him down. Ollie comically retorts that he was able to take down a god with a simple arrow from a mile away, amidst raging storm winds while he was on a bloody Kraken. He then looks up at the stars and says, "Fuck you, Batman. I could be a world-ending threat if I wanted to be." But the fight isn't over yet. They still need to hold back millions of infected Atlanteans. So the Amazonians and their queens join the fight, including Wonder Girl and Antiope. Lois remarks that ideally Themyscira should have remained hidden, but when Superman, Wonder Woman, and Green Canary added more land to the island, the magic was broken, and they were no longer hidden. We then see the Amazonians hold back the Atlanteans valiantly, and while Superman was wreaking havoc half a world away, as Wonder Woman, Green Canary, and Cyborg approached him. Once she had verified that there was no living soul around except them, Green Canary produced a huge loudspeaker using the green energy and then screamed into it with all force, directing all the sonic energy towards Superman. It was beautiful and powerful enough to make him fall to his knees. Meanwhile, the war at Themyscira raged on. Despite all their prowess in war, the assault was simply too much for the Amazonians. The Atlanteans outnumbered them 1 to 10, and slowly but surely they began to fall. Philippus watched in horror as the love of her life, Antiope, was infected in front of her eyes. Lois recounts this with regret in her voice because this wasn't their war. Amazonians shouldn't have fought it, but they fought it nonetheless and kept fighting it till the very end. We then see that Oliver was the first one to realize that the Amazonians planned to fight till death. He was at the Ark keeping the infected away, and the Amazon warriors' formation made it apparent to him. He informed Mira of the same and forced her to get in the Ark while on ground. Queen Hippolyta did the same with Wonder Girl. She ordered Cassandra, aka Cassie, to continue living, and the youngin wanted to take the queen with her, but Hippolyta refused. Her time was over, and it was now time for Diana to be the queen. The promise of Themyscira was now hers to uphold. Hippolyta handed her crown to Wonder Girl, and with pride in her eyes, pushed her towards the Ark. The Ark left the island of Themyscira with the last visual of Queen Hippolyta looking up at them with pride, and her top warrior Philippus screaming and bringing hell down on the Atlanteans. Half a world away, Superman had learned to bear the canary screams and was about to kill the Green Canary when a blast from Vic distracted him, and Diana used this chance to slice his right arm off. She then took the Krypton-laced Athena's sword and stabbed it right through his gut. What was once Clark screamed out in horrid pain, and for once, the impenetrable Man of Steel realized what it meant to feel hurt. And this angered him, so much so that he took his good left arm and jammed it straight through Diana's stomach the very next second, proving that he never needed a sword to stab someone in the first place. Diana fell, and Superman left Earth's atmosphere to chase after the Arks. Cyborg and Green Canary rushed to their friend's aid with tears in their eyes as Diana handed over the mantle of Wonder Woman to Green Canary. Canary took the sword while slowly adjusting herself to the weight of responsibilities that came with it, and that is when Vic revealed to her that he doesn't plan on leaving Earth. This was a preposterous decision, but it had never been a choice for Vic. He brought the anti-life virus to Earth, and so it was his duty to stay on the planet. And then, up in space, John faced the ultimate form of duty. Lois tells us through her narration that this is something no child should go through. Parents are supposed to protect their children and not the other way around. But Superman was hurtling towards them at supersonic speeds right now, and he was the only one who could hold them back. John and Damian were awfully calm at this moment. The two teenagers seemed to have aged decades in the past few weeks. They knew what needed to be done, and they didn't sugarcoat things. John asked Damian to care for his mother in case something happened to him, and Damian promised to look after her as if she were his own. The two simply hugged and said goodbye with the words, "You're going to be a great Batman. You're going to be the best Superman." Lois tried to be supportive and encouraging towards her son, but she knew John didn't need any more words. The Band-Aid needed to be pulled off instantly, so she simply looked at him with pride as he leapt towards his former father at supersonic speeds. Superman snarled as the two of them met in the vacuum of space with a huge explosion of light. The impact dazed both of them, Superman still leaving a thick trail of blood from his amputated right arm, but former Clark's hunger for death exceeded that of John's survival instincts, and so, as soon as he was able to steady himself, he aimed his eyes at John and powered up his heat vision. But that is when Green Canary caught up with them, and it wasn't her alone. The Green Lantern Corps were finally here to aid humanity in their fight for survival. Green Canary quickly caught them all up to speed, and this is when Ganthet noticed that Superman wasn't attacking. He was simply studying them all. Green Canary told them that it wasn't Superman anymore. It was the anti-life equation, and the equation was currently weighing its odds against the corpse. And she was right, because instead of fighting, what was once Superman began to fly away, and not in an attempt to escape, but instead in an attempt to power up himself. Former Superman flew into the sun and then began absorbing its energy. Ganthet then weighed the odds. It would take some time for all of the sun's energy to get absorbed, and once that happens, the entire solar system will be plunged into stasis, which thankfully would put the virus to sleep. And so the decision to leave the solar system alone and monitor it from a distance is made. The Corps will ensure that the virus doesn't escape this space sector, and Green Canary isn't happy with this decision one bit, but has no choice but to play along. Even the Corps don't have the power to penetrate a star and pull Superman out of it, and so they leave and escort humanity towards their new destination. Back on Earth, darkness has taken over and rain has begun pelting down on it. Vic stares into Diana's eyes as the equation takes over his former friend, but instead of ending her life, he uses the lasso of truth on her, and this is when it is revealed that the equation can talk. It has a hive mind, and it calls itself Death personified. Vic then uses the lasso to ask for a cure. After all, the equation has manifested itself as a virus, so there is bound to be a cure. And that is when the equation reveals that there is indeed a cure, and it has been inside Vic all along. The equation says, you are man and machine. You are binary, off and on, patient 0 and the 1, the alpha, the omega. And this revelation plunges Vic into despair, because if he had looked for a cure in him, maybe everyone wouldn't have needed to die. There was no need to build the arcs. There was no need for all his friends to sacrifice themselves. And the equation, through former Wonder Woman, uses this lapse in Vic's attention to ambush and decapitate him. The equation throws Vic's decapitated head away and says, life is fleeting. That is the only truth. Death is forever. And we then catch up with the arcs as humanity arrives on its new home planet. John has survived the ordeal, albeit with a broken arm, and this begins the new chapter in humanity's book. Everyone sheds a tear as they lay eyes on their new planet. DCeased, Undead Planet. Issue number 1. At what cost? It has been 5 years since the anti-life equation destroyed Earth 1, and the loss of all the heroes still haunts the survivors. Survivor's guilt can be one hell of a problem, especially if you're all alone, something John Constantine is learning the hard way. He spends his days searching the Earth for survivors, and nights drinking alone in the Oblivion bar while being accompanied by the ashes of his friend, Chaz. It's night right now, and John is following his daily routine. This is when Zatanna visits him, and John reveals to her that he never drinks alone. We then, Big Barda, Mr. Miracle, Mr. Terrific, Blue Beetle, and Booster Gold, keeping him company in spirit. Zatanna is narrating these events in hindsight, and he tells that Vic had survived being decapitated by what once used to be Diana. His system had gone into hibernation in an attempt to conserve power, and Vic, in his decapitated head, had spent the next 5 years dormant, his system waiting to fix itself in some way. Once that was done, he looked for a way to reach out to his friends, and he found it in the form of a tracker planted on him by Bruce. Bruce's betrayal proved to be his salvation, because he was able to use the tracker to reach out to the arcs that went in space. He only had power for 2 letters, but that's all he needed. He converted the letters into Morse code, amplified the signal, and then sent it out into space. The new Justice League, meanwhile, was busy defending Earth 2 against an alien invasion when this happened. John was the new Superman, Damian the new Batman, and Cassie the new Wonder Woman. John and Damian had a relationship much like their father's. John was benevolent and would desperately try to hold Damian's violent actions back. For instance, during the invasion, he was pleading with Damian to not fatally injure the aliens because they wanted a peace treaty. On the other hand, Damian loved pushing his friend's buttons and testing his limits like Bruce. So much so that once Damian had reached the king and had challenged him to a fight, John had to use his super speed to stop the confrontation. We then see John lead the alien king to converse with their leader, President of Earth 2, home to 13 million human survivors, Lois Lane. Lois was bartering a peace treaty when Damian received the call from Alfred, informing him of the tracker beeping on the briefcase bestowed upon him by Bruce. Hours later, the new Justice League, consisting of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Canary, Green Arrow, and Hawkgirl, had reconvened at the new Hall of Justice where Damian had told them all about the signal. It was from Vic, and the two letters in Morse code were J and L, short for Justice League. Much to Ollie's dismay, everyone had voted to go back and rescue their friend, and despite Lois's apprehensions, she had allowed her son to go for the mission. Dinah knew why Oliver was apprehensive about going back. He didn't want to lose anyone else. They finally had a decent life here, and he wanted to spend the rest of it with Dinah peacefully. Dinah knew Oliver's heart was in the right place, which is why she bestowed him with the Kryptonian-laced Athena's sword and made a promise that eased his heart. Dinah said, "I promise I'll bring you back." She didn't know it back then, but it was a promise she couldn't keep. We then see the Justice League reach outside Earth 1, where Kilowog from the Green Lantern Corps is standing guard. John had forgotten about it, but the Corps stood guard on rotational shifts because Superman was still busy absorbing the sun, and they needed to keep a close eye on him and the planet. They are then warned about an incoming projectile from Earth and Green Canary, and Kilowog desperately put up shields to protect them all. Unfortunately, the shields break, but thankfully, the projectile is someone familiar. It's Crypto, and he somehow managed to survive this long. After the hearty reunion, they quickly make their way down to Earth and find Vic's head. Lying near it is the lasso of truth, which Cassie quickly picks up and uses it to compel Vic's head to speak. Vic's energy is running low, and he is unable to speak full sentences at the moment, but the desperation in his eyes is palpable, and this is juxtaposed with Hawkgirl, telling them that the hordes of infected are only 10 minutes away. They quickly call in their ship and leave within a few minutes. John carries Vic's body, while Cassie carries his head, and by the time he is able to warn them, it's all over. Vic barely manages to say, "She's here, she's always here, run!" And this is when what once used to be Wonder Woman hurtles through the sky and splits their ship in half. Amidst all this destruction, the heroes scatter, and the only one left on the ground is Ollie, the one wielding Athena's sword. So naturally, Wonder Woman beelines for him and kills him in an instant. She tears his flesh to pieces as Green Canary lets out a horrific scream, which propels the infected Wonder Woman backwards. Oliver screams out in pain, partly because of the infection taking over and partly due to the damage done by Green Canary's scream, but Green Canary isn't in the mood to stop. She picks up Athena's sword and heads straight for Wonder Woman. Hawkgirl hurls her mace at former Wonder Woman and hits her in the face. Green Canary summons a giant hand and pins her down. She then rushes at her with Athena's sword, and all this is happening while Vic desperately tries to ask them to stop. He has been trying to say something, but no one can hear him. No one except John, who in the nick of time tries to push his body between Green Canary and former Wonder Woman, which causes Athena's sword to go straight through his shoulder and into former Diana's throat. Diana's dead and John wasn't able to save her. He gasps in pain, looks up at Green Canary, and tells her why he tried to save Diana. He heard what Vic was trying to say. There's a cure, and if that's true, then they could have saved Wonder Woman. DCeased, Undead Planet, issue number 2, Limits. The comic starts in Chicago, and we see Ollie's teenage sidekick Roy Harper, aka Arsenal, has managed to survive all this while. Not only that, he has managed to protect a group of survivors as well, and he protects them when the anti-living attack in waves. Another wave is on the horizon, and as usual, he quickly ushers everyone inside. However, today is different, and the equation knows that, which is why Roy today isn't attacked just by the anti-living. He is attacked by an infected fire as well, aka Beatrice da Costa. She ambushes him while he is assuring Gracie, a little girl, and she watches Roy burn to a crisp in front of her eyes. Zatanna's narration tells us that in times like these, when heroes don't cut it, you need assholes, and the gnarliest asshole on Earth shows up to protect Gracie. John Constantine, and he's not alone, he's here with Shadow Pact, a group of ruthless fighters and magicians that travel the world to save survivors. The group consists of Blue Devil, a demon with impenetrable skin, Ragman, a man who has absorbed hundreds of corrupted souls and uses them to grant him superpowers. Unfortunately, the anti-living don't have souls, so he hasn't been able to increase his power since all of this started. Then there's Detective Chimp, aka Bobo, the self-explanatory best detective in the world now that Bruce is dead, Ravager, aka Rose Wilson, a precognitive ruthless killer, and Red Hood, aka Jason Todd. Much like Batman, without the rule of not killing people. He loves killing people. Completing their group is the unmatched magician Zatanna, and we get a glimpse into her power when she causes Beatrice to simply lose her powers mid-air and splatter into half as she hits the wall. John is about to introduce himself to Gracie when he is interrupted by a familiar guttural voice of Swamp Thing. John doesn't pay much attention to Swamp Thing because he is busy killing the anti-living, so the Swamp Thing solves this problem by killing all of them instantly. He sprouts sharp wooden barbs from the earth that impale every anti-living in the vicinity. But John Constantine is widely known as an asshole for a reason. He doesn't know when he needs to stop joking and when he needs to take things seriously. And when the Swamp Thing gets another dose of John's attitude, he screams out in anger, "Shut the fuck up!" Silence. Dead silence takes over, utters a word. Swamp Thing is known to be the most polite and respectful being among all the heroes, and if he is using such language, surely things are dire. They listen to him, and Swamp Thing is here to take John and the rest of them on a mission to Australia. There is a second garden there, much like Poison Ivy's, and he is going there to save it. The Swamp Thing can't ignore its cries anymore. He needs to take John because the garden has survivors, and only John and his team can rescue them with their powers. We then head to Poison Ivy's garden, where the latest survivors, who have been saved by the Shadow Pact, are brought in by Red Hood and Ravager. Shadow Pact has been bringing survivors to Ivy's sanctuary, and in the past 5 years it has grown significantly. So much so that heroes like Mary Marvel and Dr. Fate have found their way here. And to add an extra layer of protection, the garden has been magically augmented to the Tower of Fate. It's the best sanctuary they have on Earth, one that is seemingly threatened when they feel a powerful being flying towards it. Mary Marvel and Dr. Fate fly out to confront this enemy, only to discover that it is Cassie, carrying John with tears in her eyes, desperately begging for help, because John won't stop bleeding. Dr. Fate knows John's wounds are magical and he needs to work on them as soon as possible. And so in the next hour or so, the entire new Justice League alongside their broken craft is housed in Ivy's sanctuary. Turns out, not only did Red Hood survive, but Batgirl, aka Cassandra Cain, did as well. They have a much-needed, hearty reunion, however tensions rise when Green Canary insists on carrying the infected Ollie in a green energy bubble with her. Ivy can't risk her sanctuary for her, and so Dinah leaves with Ollie before the confrontation takes a violent turn. Harley's funny quips are a much-needed distraction during all these events, and when she tries to talk to Vic's disembodied head, she is the one to discover that there is indeed a cure. The cure is within him, and they need only find it. However, this revelation leaves everyone devastated, because this means that every loved one they have killed in the past 5 years could have been saved. It is Dr. Fate who lifts their spirits up by telling them to look on the bright side. They have had magic and science, but now they have hope as well, and so they should be able to find the cure easily. Cassie is visibly distraught, because now she has seen Wonder Woman die in front of her eyes twice, and when Damian offers her reassurance, their love blooms, and they take it to the next level. We then catch up with the rest of the Shadow Pact and Swamp Thing in Australia. The garden he was talking about is inside a heavily fortified bunker that is currently surrounded by a ring of hellfire then a mote of blood, and finally a few thousand anti-living. It's some sort of a layered horror cake that they need to cut through. Zatanna decides to fly them over the anti-living and the moat, while the Blue Devil promises to control the Hellfire once they reach there. However, things quickly go south when Detective Chimp begins screaming. He's the closest to the moat of blood, and he is the only one able to discern that it is not blood. It's Plastic Man, but it's too late by the time he conveys this to the rest of them. Plastic Man stabs through Ragman and kills him in an instant. He then tries to shove tendrils into Zatanna's eyes and throat, but she is quickly saved by the Blue Devil, who cuts off the tendrils. Sadly, he isn't that lucky, because Plastic Man does the same to him and squeezes his brains out of the back of his skull and ears. John Constantine screams out in horror as all of them plunge down into the cavernous, toothy mouth of what has become of Plastic Man, while a mysterious group of 3 shadow figures from the bunker keeps a close eye on them. DCeased, Undead Planet, issue number 3, Heist. The comic opens up on a miracle. John, Swamp Thing, Bobo, and Zatanna have survived the assault. Swamp Thing managed to create a bubble of plants at the last moment and saved them all, but now they need Zatanna's help to kill the Plastic Man. John tells her about Hellfire. It's the only fire in all the realms that can burn anything, and Zatanna gets the hint. Swamp Thing opens the bubble, and Zatanna redirects the Hellfire and burns what has now become of Plastic Man to a crisp. They then recover the body of their fallen friends and pay homage to them. However, this moment is short-lived when a few hundred bullets are fired upon them. It manages to warn them in the nick of time, and they all escape the barrage by ducking down. The bullets were fired from the bunker, and they were aimed at the anti-living in an attempt to buy them enough time to get inside. The bunker is occupied by a different kind of evil, the kind of evil Constantine hates the most. Filthy rich criminals occupy it, namely Maxwell Lord, Professor Ivo, the Penguin, aka Oswald Cobblepot, and of course Jason Blood. We then head to Gotham, where Damien is busy stitching back John's costume when the familiar voice of Commissioner Gordon suddenly greets him. Gordon tries to shake his hand, but Damien isn't like his father. He pulls in Gordon for a big hug. The two catch up and joke about Bruce's fear of intimacy when they are interrupted by Dr. Fate, who tells Damien that he has managed to heal John and he should be up within the hour. An hour later, John wakes up and he is ambushed by Crypto, who has been by his side all this while. Mary Marvel, who stitched him up physically, also introduces herself to him, and there seems to be a romantic connection between the two. We then catch up with John and the others in the Australian bunker, where Penguin and the rest of them try to justify their actions by telling them that their employees work for them in exchange for shelter and food. It's totally not slavery at all. Jason Blood then pulls John aside, and Constantine already knows why. Jason's presence explains the Hellfire, because in reality, he in fact is the demon Etrigan. Etrigan informs John that Hell isn't happy with what is happening on Earth because the anti-living have trapped souls, and the lack of incoming souls in Hell has sparked an outrage. This has forced them to adopt drastic measures, which means the demon Trigon is on his way and he is going to destroy the world of the living. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of gunfire and screams, and when they rush in that direction, they realize that Swamp Thing is raging war on all of the denizens of the bunker. The green that was screaming out to him from the bunker was in fact the incarcerated Floronic Man, whom the rich were forcing to produce food for them. John tries to calm Swamp Thing down, and for a moment it seems that he might be open to talk, but when one of the soldiers calls him a walking houseplant, Swamp Thing gives up that idea and decapitates the soldier. This forces Cobblepot to reveal his plan against the heroes, and the very next second they are attacked by Amazo, an android with all the powers of the Justice League in one single package. He destroys the Swamp Thing's current form using Superman's heat vision, and seeing as how things are getting out of hand, John begins to create a portal while Zatanna holds Amazo back. Because it isn't just one Amazo attacking them, Cobblepot has multiple of them. Swamp Thing reforms and wants to continue the fight and save the Floronic Man, but John forces him to escape with them while promising that they will return with a better plan and more firepower. However, once they are gone, we see that Cobblepot isn't really affected by their escape, and nor is he tormented by the fact that they may be back, and this is because he doesn't have a few Amazos at his disposal. No, he has an entire army of them. We then head to Gotham in Poison Ivy's sanctuary. John is now in his costume, having completely recovered from his injuries, and so is Vic. He is whole again. He is telling them about how he used the lasso of truth and forced the anti-living to reveal that the cure was in him all along. And this is when Damian postulates that if there is an anti-life equation, there is likely a life equation. Half of the anti-life equation was held by Darkseid, which means they need apocalyptic knowledge if they are to find this cure. This is when Constantine realizes that he needs to step in and do what he has been fearing all this while. He borrows Cassie's lasso of truth and then heads out with Bobo. Hours later, he is outside a pretty remote cabin in the middle of nowhere, and upon knocking, a huge figure opens the door with long hair, and this is when our narrator, Zatanna, reveals that he and his friend's initial plan to save the world was simple. Booster Gold would go back in time and stop all of this from ever happening. But you see, that is where their problem lay. Booster Gold was from a future that no longer existed, and so he stopped existing as well. And this means Mr. Miracle and Big Barda sacrificed their life for a man who was never born. But this change in the future meant that Big Barda was infected, but Mr. Miracle wasn't. He is the one spending his days wallowing in this remote cabin. When John tries to ask for his help, Mr. Miracle calls him manipulative and accuses him of lying to all of them. But this is why John brought along the lasso of truth. He wants Mr. Miracle to use it on him to ensure John isn't lying this time. Bobo and Constantine tell him about the cure, and they tell him that they need apocalyptic knowledge, which means they will need his mother box. But more importantly, John needs Mr. Miracle's skills. John is planning a heist, and he plans to steal the throne from a god. DCeased, Undead Planet, issue number 4, The Soldiers of Anti-Living. And so we catch up with Wally and the rest in Ivy's garden. They're all startled by the familiar sound of a boom tube, but thankfully it's only Constantine, Bobo, and Mr. Miracle. John is reprimanded for using a boom tube in the middle of the sanctuary by Batman, and after a few words and greetings, they begin hatching a plan. They need to access Metron's Mobius chair. The chair contains all the knowledge of the new gods, and if there is a cure inside Cyborg, Vic should be able to find it by using the chair. Thrifting Metron won't be easy, but they have the best detectives on their side, so they get to work. Damian and Gordon reveal that they need to lure Metron with something valuable enough, and that is when John pulls out Madame Xanadu's crystal ball, which shows the future, something that he stole from her. Their plan convinces Mr. Miracle the crystal ball will be enough to entice Metron, but he is unsure how he will be greeted on New Genesis. This is when Superman promises to accompany them alongside his friends, but that is when he realizes Green Canary is missing. He and Mary Marvel, aka Shazam, meet Dinah outside the sanctuary, sitting at the edge of a roof in the rain while holding on to her husband in a bubble of green energy. John's arrival breathes a new life in her when she realizes she didn't kill him, and after a hearty reunion, they confront the elephant in the room. Dinah doesn't want to leave Ollie. After all, she promised she would take him back, and that is when Superman tells her about the cure. They might be able to save him, but he needs her for this heist. This is when Mary Marvel says that she will convince Dr. Fate to use his powers to keep Oliver contained until they return, but all of them fail to notice the hunger and determination in the anti-living Oliver's eyes. He is planning something big, and so Cassie, John, Scott, Vic, and Mary leave in a boom tunnel and head for New Genesis. Batman kisses Cassie in front of everyone before they leave, and their arrival on New Genesis is equally stellar when Scott is greeted by his unfunny brother, Lightray. However, this family reunion quickly becomes quite intense when Orion repeatedly punches Scott as a punishment for bringing Vic, aka the host of the anti-life equation, on New Genesis. Scott takes each punch head on, but Superman can't sit around and watch it without intervening. He tries to stop Orion verbally, but John punches Orion and knocks him unconscious when the latter doesn't listen. The High Father then arrives and greets them, and this is when Scott reveals his plan to his father. His father agrees to summon Metron, but before he does so, he has a request for Scott in exchange. Scott left his son Jacob with his father 5 years ago and hasn't returned to see him since then. High Father wants Scott to change that. He wants to see Jacob as a part of Big Barda that he can love. Giving Scott away to Darkseid is one of High Father's biggest regrets to this day, and he wants Scott to have with his son what he never could have with Scott. Scott agrees and is now more determined than ever to find a cure, and so the plan begins. begins. Metron is summoned where once Apocalypse used to be until Darkseid destroyed it once he was infected. Metron arrives and is indeed attracted by Madame Xanadu's crystal ball. However, he doesn't get time to look into it, because as soon as he tries to reach for it, he is restrained by Green Canary, who fashions huge handcuffs out of the green energy. But Metron is a lot stronger than them. He grabs Green Canary and flings her away. He then punches Mr. Miracle and sends him flying into a nearby chunk of Apocalypse. He then tries to squeeze the life of Cassie, who is saved when Mary zaps his arm with a lightning bolt. But this gives Metron enough space to make his escape, and he begins to speed away rapidly. Superman and Shazam give chase and try to convince him to let them use his chair to find a cure. Metron isn't pleased by their ambush antics, but more importantly, he doesn't care about Earth or what happens to it. But this is when Shazam, aka Mary's question, leads him to change his views. She says, if we fail to contain the anti-life equation and death wins, then what will happen to the knowledge you hold so dear? And so Metron agrees to let Vic use his chair in exchange for momentarily using Madame Xanadu's orb. Mr. Miracle, however, demands Metron to give up his chair first. Once Vic has found the cure, he can have Xanadu's crystal ball. Metron agrees, and so Vic uses the chair, and although overwhelmed by the sheer influx of information at first, he manages to find the cure. He needs to recode his blood to find the life equation. However, when Metron takes one look at the crystal ball, he hands it back and says, "I can't be her. I must leave now." He then gets on his chair rapidly and leaves this sector of space at the speed of light. Although our heroes are confused, they can't be bothered to investigate what scared the living lights out of Metron. They open a boom tube and head back to Earth. However, both the parties failed to notice a third party present at that scene. A party that was present when all of this started. A party that was used to create the anti-life equation, the Black Racer. Only the Black Racer witnesses what comes next. The solidified core of Apocalypse begins to split apart, and out comes the anti-living Darkseid. This change in the universe was enough to garner the High Father's attention, but it was already too late by the time he warned the denizens of New Genesis. Forager ran away with Jacob in his arms, while High Father ran outside only to discover Orion getting the life crushed out of him by Darkseid. DCeased, Undead Planet, issue number 5, the heist was the first step. And so unaware of Darkseid's revival, John continues his secret plan on Earth, and right now he somehow has a secret room in the Tower of Fate, a room that even Dr. Fate can't access. Dr. Fate tries his best to ask Constantine about the room, but true to his nature, Constantine keeps his cards close to his chest. We then see that he has summoned Etrigan to the secret room, and he has been summoned to reveal the truth to Swamp Thing. Once Swamp Thing is told about Trigon's arrival within 48 hours, he decides to join John on his secret devious plan. John promises to free Floronic Man soon, and then leaves the room with the Swamp Thing while carrying Ragman's cloak. Dr. Fate is perplexed when even the Swamp Thing refuses to reveal what's inside the room. John has a gnarly plan, and for this, he needs a team that won't be afraid to make the hard call, and so he approaches Batman, who is currently busy playing with Ace. Damian decides to join John's secret cause on 2 conditions. No one will die, and John needs to tell Damian his entire plan. John realizes that Damian is a ditto copy of his father, and reveals his secret plan to him in hushed whispers. Damian is visibly distraught by the plan, but decides to follow along nonetheless. We are then greeted by the rest of the people who will be accompanying them, Jason, Rose, and Cassandra. The former 2 have always been Constantine's most relied on teammates, while Cassandra simply forced them to take her along. What's more is the fact that this is a much-needed Bat family reunion. After all, Jason and Rose are a married couple. Damian hugs them and welcomes them into the family, and we then see why John needed the Swamp Thing. He is the only one who can track and take them to the mysterious hidden city of Nanda Parbat. Swamp Thing's form is red when they arrive at their destination, and they have to fight their way through a horde of the anti-living to get to the city. The only catch? Batman's here, which means there will be no killing, and so they start battling the anti-living, and when they get near the front doors, Rose's precognition kicks in, and she knows that she simply needs to knock. Once she does that, the doors are flung open, and an army of monks comes to hold the anti-living back, while the dead man, aka Boston Brand, greets them and invites them inside. However, John is on a mission, and he isn't here to play nice. He's here for the Spear of Destiny, and he is going to take it one way or the other. Ramakushna, the goddess of Nanda Parbat, refuses his request, but her mistake in the first place was misjudging Constantine's intent and letting him get close to the spear, because once John John has his hands on it, he turns around and stabs Ramakrishna in the gut with it. Deadman tries to intervene, but this is where Ragman's cloak comes into play. After all, it has been designed to steal souls, and Deadman was nothing but a soul. Deadman is absorbed by the cloak, and against all the cries of protests from Batgirl and Red Hood, Constantine forces them to leave. But he doesn't take them back to Ivy's garden, he takes them to the Rock of Eternity. He also curbs all of their worries by telling them that he didn't fatally stab Ramakrishna, just hurt her enough that it would take a century or two for her to recover. And then, the Swamp Thing reveals why they are on the Rock of Eternity. This is the home of the wizard Shazam, and they're here to steal his staff, and it seems that the Swamp Thing has been privy to John's plans this far all along. But that is when Rose's precognition kicks in, and she tries to get them out of there that very instant, but they pay much attention to her words, and her husband, Jason Todd, aka Red Hood, ends up paying the price. She tried to warn them about the infected Captain Marvel Jr., who came whizzing through the air and broke Jason's body in half by slamming him against the rock the very next second. And although Swamp Thing managed to subdue him using roots in an instant, by then it was already too late. The infected wizard tried to ambush Rose, who had Jason in her arms, but she simply threw her sword and stabbed him in the head without even looking. Her grief over the death of her husband had put her precognition abilities into overdrive. This is when Captain Marvel Jr. broke out of his restraints, and in a desperate attempt to stop anyone else from dying, Batgirl took Shazam's staff, and to everyone's surprise, she ended up transforming. Cassandra has suffered a lot in her life, but she has always followed Bruce's path and has always had her own flavor of fun while following it. Maybe this is what made her pure of heart, or maybe this is why she was granted the powers of Shazam. Either way, this was all a poetic way of saying that after this, Captain Marvel Jr. didn't stand a chance against her. Cassandra was the daughter of Lady Shiva, and after her mother's death, she was the most deadly hand-to-hand combatant on Earth, which is why Captain Marvel Jr. was on the ground and incapacitated in a second. Jason's last moments were spent reassuring Rose that coming back from the dead was the best thing he ever did, and that's because he got to live with her. With tears in her eyes, Rose kissed him one last time, and that, my friends, was the end of Jason Todd, and Bat Family was once again a member short. Naturally, upon returning to the sanctuary, he got his cheekbone cracked by Batman, all because he failed to keep his promise of no one dying. Jason died, and deep down, Constantine knew that Batman was letting him off easy. You might be hating John Constantine right now, but here's the kicker. The Spectre, aka Jim Corrigan, was in the same boat as well. He confronted Constantine that night, while the latter wielded the Spear of Destiny and Shazam's staff. But Constantine did need to threaten Jim. All he had to say was, "Why don't you use all that power and try to look into my mind? What do you think I'm motivated by?" And after the Spectre looked into Constantine's mind, he simply turned around and flew away, wishing John a good night. DCeased, Undead Planet, issue number 6, Hidden Plans, work the best. And so all the master plans around the world begin to kick in, albeit all of them have their own hitches. For instance, Cobblepot was being roughed up by Evo because he was under the impression that the Amazo army was his, but in fact, he had only paid for it. Evo had made them, and he was the one who controlled them. Similarly, in the Sanctuary, Vic had managed to recode his blood, but he didn't know how to turn the life equation into a cure. And all this while we see John and Damian spending as much time as possible with their long-lost pets, Ace and Crypto. But what our heroes had on their side was Batman, and Batman could solve any problem. And so Damian started by gathering all the scientists and medical professionals they could get their hands on. The Swamp Thing, Dr. Fate, Poison Ivy, Harley Quinn, Vic Stone, Mary Marvel, Detective Chimp, Wallace West, and of course, Batman himself. The Swamp Thing was once Alec Holland, a Nobel Prize-winning biochemist. Poison Ivy was once Pamela Isley, Doctor of Toxicology. Harley used to be Harleen Quinzel, Doctor of Psychology and Medicine, and Vic, well, he was the perfect infusion of man and technology. They were all linked with the telepathic powers of the Swamp Thing and Dr. Fate to create one big idea engine, and they were aided by the likes of Detective Chimp, Batman, and Wally West. Wally was the fastest mind on Earth, while the other two were the best detectives mankind had at their disposal right now. Batman's idea worked, and they found a way to cure it. However, this is juxtaposed by Evo perfecting his Amazo army on the other side of the globe, and the race to save or destroy humanity begins once again. Cobblepot and the rest of them were trying to kill all the anti-living and take over the planet, while our heroes were racing to cure and save them. The Amazo swarm began its assault, and simultaneously, Vic managed to develop the first batch of the cure. It was now time to test it, and they had two candidates at their disposal, Ollie and Big Barda. Green Canary was enraged when Scott suggested curing murdering his wife first, but her anger quickly subsided when she realized Scott was just trying to help her. Ollie was after all a human. If there was a complication in the cure, they risked losing him forever. Barda, on the other hand, was a god, and she could likely handle any complication in case the cure failed. And so Superman, Green Canary, and Mr. Miracle used the boom tube to travel to the habitable moon near Alpha Centauri. It's where Scott had left his wife imprisoned. And although she had managed to break free and had attacked Scott, John had managed to use the cure on her, and she was back to her normal self minutes later. In case you're wondering, they fashioned the needle of the syringe from a sliver of Athena's sword. Everything was going according to plan. The cure was working, and John's antics were hidden. Well, that was until Zatanna blew open his secret room's door in the Tower of Fate and barged in. John had stolen Madame Xanadu's crystal ball, the Spear of Destiny, and the Shazam staff. She was demanding answers, but John wasn't about to give them to her. After all, he had used the crystal ball to see the future and knew what needed to be done to save the world, which meant not revealing his plans till the end. The problem he now had on his hands was that Zatanna had left the door to his secret room open, which allowed Phantom Stranger to walk in without any hurdles. He was here to stop John from continuing on this path, but there was more to it, because John was Madame Xanadu's ex, and Phantom Stranger was her current partner. The argument between them became quite heated, and when John refused to stop his plan, Phantom Stranger slammed him to a nearby wall using his powers. This only bolstered Constantine, but to prevent any more violence, Zatanna summoned Etrigan, who promptly arrived and took his human form, Jason Blood. Trigon will be here within the hour, and they have another problem on their hands. Etrigan tells John about the Amazo army on the other side of the globe. John informs the rest of the heroes in the sanctuary about the Amazo army and Trigon's coming, and this is when Big Barda, Mr. Miracle, and the rest of them arrive in the sanctuary using the boom tube. Vic analyzes Barda and realizes that there has been no degradation in her personality or body, and this means that all the infected people are being held in some sort of stasis while the anti-life equation controls their body. They need to act fast, so it's Wally's turn to use his powers. Wally studies mass production in the next 10 minutes, becomes an expert on it, and then he and Vic use the Magnus Labs to manufacture a batch of 3 billion vials of the cure. However, Trigon has arrived, and he has just decimated the entire population of Paris on the other side of the Atlantic. This is when John executes the last part of his plan and invites Dr. Fate into his secret room while asking Zatanna to stand outside. For the last part of his plan, John needs Dr. Fate's amulet and helm, and because he won't give up these things freely, Phantom Killer stabs him with the Spear of Destiny. John then adorns Ragman's cloak and uses the power of Shazam to take what he needs, and turns out Etrigan and Phantom Killer are on his side because he has shown them the future. His plan has been completed, and he now has the amulet and helm, but that is when Zatanna barges in and discovers what he is doing. He assures Zatanna that Kent will survive the stab wound, and this is when Zatanna realizes what John is doing. John is going to sacrifice himself, and he knows this needs to be done because he has seen the future. What's more is that he now wields the Shazam staff, which means he's pure of heart, and this is when Zatanna crumbles, and so does John. He doesn't have the heart to lie to her, and she doesn't have the heart to demand the truth of his dying from him. They both simply kiss and seal their love in this lifetime, and then John wields the power of Shazam, Fate, and Ragman as he declares, "Ready or not, world, I'm coming to fucking save you."
DCeased, Undead Planet, issue number 7. The Dead Plan. The Amazos had wiped out the anti living around the bunker and were now wreaking havoc in the city of Brisbane. Things weren't looking good, but that was until the Justice League showed up. These Amazos were designed to kill the Justice League, yes, but they were designed for the old Justice League. What they faced now was a far more powerful league, imbued with new powers and weapons that could wipe them out. Miracle Man, Big Barda, Wonder Woman, Batgirl, Green Canary, and Marvel Girl all showed up in a boom tunnel to face the Amazo army. Cassie now had the lasso of truth on her side. Green Canary had Athena's sword, and Batgirl had the power of Shazam. As for Miracle Man and Big Barda, well, they were literal gods. The Amazos began to fall, and Zatanna and Phantom Stranger showed up to face Trigon on the other side of Earth. John was supposed to meet them here, but he was nowhere to be seen. This, however, did not stop Phantom Stranger from interfering after what he had seen happen in the future that John showed him. He called out Trigon, and the fight between them began. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, at the bunker in Australia, Superman and Batman showed up, hoping to remotely stop the Amazo army. John was devastated at the sight of millions of anti-living that the Amazos had decimated, and this is when the two of them were ambushed by a lingering Amazo. John was punched, and the android had then tried to kill John's best friend. And so Superman held the android back while Batman destroyed him with an EMP device. The Amazo was sent by Cobblepot, and realizing that the Penguin had just tried to kill his best friend, John tore through the impenetrable bunker in a second. The confrontation began, and Cobblepot wasn't about to lose his plan of ruling the world to Superman. He had planned for this, which is why all of his men had remote-controlled kryptonite bullets. Unfortunately for him, they chose a better life, which is why they refused to fire and kill Superman. And just like that, it was over. Not because the guards killed them or Batman, but because John showed up and the Ragman clock absorbed all the corrupt souls in the bunker. Cobblepot, alongside all the other rich people, disintegrated into nothing while choking on their own breath. John then orders Superman to help Wally cure the people around the world while he goes to face Trigon in Europe with his newly powered Ragman clock. Batman and Superman continue scouring the bunker and find out that Professor Ivo was killed by Cobblepot, which means that the knowledge of how the Amazos are controlled dies with him. This means that they will have to now hope that Vic can learn from the Amazo head they carry and find a way to remotely disable the Amazo army. The next second, they flew around the world to Magnus Labs and explained what needed to be done to Cyborg. Vic was visibly apprehensive about the idea of using a virus to infect the Amazo army after what had happened with the anti-life equation, but they convinced him to do this nonetheless. Superman and Wally decide to try to cure people around the world before the Amazo army reaches them, while Vic and Batman work on the virus that would stop the army. And so everybody jumped into action. Superman and Wally rushed around the world curing people, and this is when John showed up to face Trigon, who currently had Phantom Stranger pinned under his foot. John handed over the Spear of Destiny to Zatanna and then confronted Trigon. In another world and another time, John couldn't have dreamed of taking on Trigon alone, yet now he had the power of Zeus on his side. He had the strength of Hercules, which was enhanced by the Lords of Order and hundreds of angry, cursed souls trapped in Ragman's clock. His punch knocked Trigon to the ground, and the fight between them was legendary. John used everything at his disposal. He even used Madame Xanadu's crystal ball to stay ahead of Trigon's attacks, but eventually, fate caught up to him, and Trigon slammed him into the ground with his fist. Every bone in John's body was broken, and he coughed his last few breaths as Zatanna sat beside him. Other heroes also began to fall. Hawkgirl got her wings ripped out, Big Barda was outnumbered, and Wally was too late to cure the people in South America. But this is when our heroes at the Magnus Labs came through. Vic activated the virus remotely through the Amazo head, and just as the army was about to overpower Green Canary, protecting her fallen comrades, the virus kicked in and all of the Amazos simply fell where they stood. And this is when Superman showed up to face Trigon as a beacon hope. He was about to cure people in Europe, but when he saw Trigon, plans changed rapidly. John had told Superman that he didn't stand a chance against Trigon. He had seen the future, but this wasn't about to stop him. Superman punched Trigon in the chest, and this is when John once again surprised Zatanna by telling her that this was all part of the plan. Yes, he had died, but he had returned as a ghost, and all that happened because he had absorbed Boston Brand's powers. Coming back as the dead man was always the plan. Why? Because now he has retained his former powers alongside Dead Man's ability to possess and control living beings. And so John flew into Trigon's head, and after a few moments of struggling, took over the devil himself. John then did something he had always chided other heroes for. He sacrificed himself. He took the Spear of Destiny and stabbed himself and Trigon using it. Trigon fell and John faded, but even then he had managed to escape the eternity of torment waiting for him in hell in true John Constantine fashion. In his last moments, he looked longingly at Zatanna and told her that this is why he didn't want her to know the plan. "I'll miss you all. Goodbye, Z." And once again, the crisis had been averted. Wally was given a much-needed break while Wonder Woman, Batgirl, Green Canary, and Marvel Girl cured people around the world. In a few hours, they were able to rid the world of this infection and even managed to bring some friends and family back. Mira cured Tempest, and Wonder Woman managed to cure the Amazonians. And John did what his father had planned for 5 years ago. He opened the barn's basement door and cured his grandfather. And Green Canary managed to keep her promise. She cured Ollie in Ivy's sanctuary and brought her back. The Justice League and friends had managed to save the world
once again, or had they? Clark is still alive, so is Darkseid, and what became of the gods on New Genesis remains to be seen. Oh well, you enjoy the fleeting moments of peace. DCeased, War of the Undead Gods, Issue number 1, Aftermath. Our story begins by showing us Kara's fate in this universe. When her parents sent her away from Kandor while Brainiac was headed for them, they didn't send her to Earth like Kal-El. Instead, they sent her to New Genesis to live with gods. They thought they were giving her the best future, but how could they have known that the gods on New Genesis had already been infected with the anti-living equation by Darkseid, and Kara was going to join them as soon as she arrived. On Earth 1, the cure had worked, but the heroes were now preparing to cure Superman, and it would be a Herculean task to say the least. John, Dinah, Vic, Cassandra Cain, Cassie, and Mary Marvel headed to the Sun to confront what was once used to be Clark, yet despite their best efforts, somehow the anti-life equation was able to see John approaching his father in the Sun. After all the power he had absorbed, former Clark was faster and stronger than all of them, and it took their combined might to keep him restrained as Vic quickly administered the cure. 2 days later, on Earth 2, Lois was being informed by Jon Stewart and Guy Gardner that their nearby planets weren't responding when they suddenly got an alert for an incoming boom tube. Much to their surprise, it was the heroes returning to their new planet with some much-needed additional members in tow. Superman had been cured, and he now had a new right metal arm thanks to Vic. The Super family had a hearty reunion, but things weren't so great for Alfred, who had taken to living with Leslie Tompkins in the past 5 years. When he realized there was a cure, the struggle to cope with the fact that he shot his own 3 sons was too huge to live with, despite all of Damian's reassurances. Big Barda and Miracle Man left for New Genesis to spend time with their son Jacob, but the odd discrepancies for Earth 2 continued the next day. First, their fellow planets stopped responding, and now Brainiac's probes had shown up in their planet's orbit. Earth 2 had 3 Green Lanterns for protection: Guy Gardner, Jon Stewart, and Jessica Cruz, but now they had 2 Supermans too, which meant that the probes had been decimated by the time the lanterns broke Earth's atmosphere. It was impressive, but the probe's arrival meant Brainiac wasn't far behind, and that was true because his ship showed up outside Earth 2 hours later. Although they were apprehensive at first, when the ship remained dormant for quite a while, John and Clark decided to head inside. What they discovered was an ominous and grim warning. They found a gored Brainiac torn in half, and all he said to them was, "The gods are dead, but still they come, Kal-El. They will poison the universe. The dead gods will end everything." DCeased, War of the Undead Gods, Issue number 2, Fear has a new god. And so Big Barda and Scott Free arrive on New Genesis, eager to meet their son Jacob after 5 years, only to discover what once used to be a paradise of gods had now been decimated into the ground. Their family was missing, but Barda had eyes only for her son Jacob, and he was nowhere to be seen. With tears in her eyes and fueled by desperation and the bellowing call of a mother's anger, Barda pushed her hand into the only thing that could explain his absence: a dark gray boom tube. But this is when the Black Racer quickly pulled her away, and as she came free, Scott saw that her hand had decayed completely. This was when Black Racer told them of the anti-living Darkseid's attack on New Genesis. Not only had he infected most of the gods, he had also infected the mother boxes with the anti-life equation, and the resulting boom tubes were in fact doom tubes, and only the unliving or the dead could pass through them. And Darkseid had used this doom tube to make his way to the planet of Korugar, the home planet of Sinestro. And although the planet was much more advanced than Earth, they stood no chance against the unliving gods. And as the life of 7 billion people came to an end, they sent out a distress signal, and it managed to reach Thal Sinestro's warworld, a planetoid of destruction that was home to the Yellow Lantern Corps. And Tal wasn't about to sit aside and watch his home planet get destroyed, and so they made their way to Korugar. A threat to all can turn enemies into allies, and this is what is happening on Earth 2 right now. Clark and Lois were advocating for enlisting Brainiac's help, but the Lanterns were against it. After all, Brainiac was a planet-killing supervillain. As a token of peace, Brainiac handed over the city of Kandor to Clark and revealed that he was willing to help them because he is a collector of knowledge, and if the undead gods destroy the universe, then there will be no knowledge left to collect. After a back and forth between Guy and Brainiac, it was decided that Earth 2 would work with Brainiac
and simultaneously in a different sector of space, the Yellow Lanterns alongside Warworld unleashed all their might on Darkseid on the planet of Korugar. Unfortunately, their attack was stopped by Saronic Natu and Kyle Rayner, a husband-wife duo belonging to the Green Lantern Corps. Saronic was also Tal's daughter, and she was under the impression that he just tried to destroy their home planet. However, it was already too late by the time Tal had explained what was going on. Kara came hurtling through the air and knocked Kyle out, but instead of attacking the rest of them, she beelined for the Warworld, because the anti-life equation wanted the destructive planetoid on its side. Kara infected it with an infected mother box. The anti-life equation took over it, and the rest was history. Most of the Yellow Lantern Corps was destroyed in an instant, and only Tal was able to hold his own, but that was until Darkseid showed up. Darkseid's Omega Beams against Saronic's willpower and Tal's fear were at a stalemate until Kara once again intervened, allowing Darkseid to grab Tal by his head. In his last moment, Tal screamed for his daughter to escape as the latter watched her father get decapitated right in front of her eyes. Saronic and Kyle escaped Orion's assault, but the damage was done because upon Tal's death, the Ring of Fear chose Darkseid as the next replacement. DCeased, War of the Undead Gods. Issue number 3, the declaration of the final war. We are now introduced to the events of 2 months ago and the war between the planets of Ran and Thanagar. The Thanagarian warriors were flying soldiers, and they would have laid waste to the planet of Ran a long time ago had it not been for a human man named Adam Strange who had adopted Ran as his home planet. He was a valiant fighter, keeping the forces of Thanagar at bay, but unfortunately, the Zeta beam that allowed him to travel to the planet of Ran was unpredictable, and it took him away at a crucial moment when he was about to flee the planet with his family. His son and wife were captured, and Adam beamed back to Gotham. As soon as he reached Earth, he programmed his jetpack to autopilot to the next location of the scheduled Zeta beam, but that is when he encountered Diana on his flight. This was 2 months ago, a month before the cure was found. Diana had infected him the moment she had spotted Adam, and what returned to Ran wasn't Adam anymore. It was an agent of the anti-living, and it intended to spread the infection across the universe. Adam started by infecting his family and the Thanagar soldiers, holding them hostage. This is how the threat began to spread across the universe even before the new Justice League reached Earth 1 after 5 years. We then head to the Rylex system, where an alien is trying to recruit noble warriors to fight the anti-living, and this is when Lobo offers his services. The recruiting officer ends up disrespecting Lobo, but before Lobo can teach him a lesson, the bar is attacked by infected Thanagarian soldiers, and through them, the anti-life equation discovers Lobo can't be infected. Lobo twists the head of the soldier, trying to infect him until it pops off, and then takes down the Thanagarian vessel with a single blow. He then walks out of the explosion while lighting a cigar, and this is when the recruiting officer begins to take him seriously. Back in Themyscira, the Amazonians are holding Diana's final rites in the presence of the Justice League, but once Artemis and Oliver have lighted her ship, they are paid visit by an unexpected guest, Ares, the god of war. Ares, their eternal enemy, is now here to warn them about the impending war and the threat the anti-living pose to the universe. He takes them all to the Hall of Gods and even allows Oliver to take Apollo's bow, because they are going to need every weapon for the war that is about to come. Because in Ares' words, this is the final war that will lead to the destruction of the universe. There is no stopping it, because they aren't facing the anti-living equation. They are facing something much bigger. He then picks up a book that recounts the events of such a war that happened in the past, only it wasn't the past of this universe, it was the past of a universe long destroyed. This is when Dinah's ring and the rings of other Green Lanterns across the universe begin broadcasting an emergency message. Saronic Natu and Kyle Rayner have reached the corpse and have warned them about Darkseid, and everyone is being updated about the threat and is being called back to Oa for an emergency meeting. We see that Clark and Lois hear this message through John Stewart. It is heard by Damian and John through Guy Gardner, and heard by Kilowog in the far reaches of the universe. Ares scoffs once the message finishes, because the corpse think that Darkseid is to be feared. He tells them that Darkseid is a fairly new god, but what they now face is something much older and larger than him. Darkseid is only a pawn to their real enemy. The enemy Darkseid awoke when he combined the anti-life equation with death through the Black Racer. Ares then opens the book and declares that Erebos is here. The personification of the primordial ooze of darkness that birthed creation is what Darkseid awoke in his quest for the anti-life equation. DCeased, War of the Undead Gods. Issue number 4, Clouded Judgments. The comic begins with a nightmare that Alfred has been living each night for the past few days. Him shooting Bruce, Dick, and Tim, and them coming back from the dead to haunt him. Leslie tries to get him to forgive himself, and this is when Alfred realizes that he might have been enacting his own vengeance through Bruce's actions for all these years. A few minutes later, Damien shows up to say goodbye to Alfred, and although the two of them try to hide their relationship, Damien is now one of the greatest detectives on Earth too, and he knows about them. He smiles widely and congratulates them because frankly, he's happy that Alfred found love, but he is here now to say goodbye because he is going with the rest of the heroes to Oa. Alfred tries to stop him, but Damien is his father's son, and he won't back down because the anti-living now threaten the entire universe. There is no sitting on the sidelines now. John arrives to take Damien away when it's time, and as they leave, all of the kids remark that it's refreshingly wonderful for Alfred to find love in these dark times. We are then introduced to Almerations on the planet of Almerac, a race of beings devoted to war. Every technological advancement they make is to aid in war. Yet after 5,000 years of seeking war and preparing for it, they are now abandoning their planet because a galactic armada of the anti-living is headed their way. And although the entire population leaves, the queens, Prima and Maxima, stay behind to buy their people enough time to escape. The two queens were first attacked by the anti-living forever people from New Genesis, but they were no match for the two warriors. However, the tables quickly turned when Darkseid arrived and Prima fell to his Omega beams. Maxima is distracted by Prima's death, and Darkseid uses this opportunity to infect her, and so another great warrior was added to the army of the anti-living. We then head to Oa, where the Guardians of the universe declare that 12 planets have been destroyed, 100 billion have been killed, 7 planets with formidable beings have been infected and added to the anti-living army, and so they have decided to wipe out the infected planets. This sparks outrage, and things heat up when Clark firmly makes his stance known. He isn't about to let a genocide ensue at the hands of the Green Lantern Corps when they have a cure at their disposal. A fight is about to start when Kilowog joins the side of the Guardians, and though Kyle Rayner tries to calm down emotions, things take a turn for the worse when Ganthet decides to imprison Superman in a bubble on Oa until the threat is taken care of. He can't risk Superman getting infected again. The obvious happens. Ganthet is unaware that Superman has been absorbing the power of the sun for 5 years, which is why he is easily able to break the bubble and punch Ganthet in the face. The downside of this is that a war breaks out in the middle of Oa when Kilowog attacks Clark, and this only stops when Batman realizes something is amiss. All of them have elevated pulses and foggy minds for some odd reason. When he spots Ares in the room, he realizes that this is Ares' doing and orders the god to stop this instant. Count on Batman to shell out orders to the god of war without batting an eye. And before Ares has a chance to retort at Batman, another unlikely ally joins their side, Mixia Spitlick, aka Mixie. A fifth-dimensional leprechaun with the ability to warp time and space in a bowler hat and orange suit. Everyone stops dead in their tracks on his arrival, and it will be more than interesting to see how this plays out. DCeased, War of the Undead Gods. Issue number 5, Encounter of the Third Kind. Earth 2 got the scare of their life that day when a boom tube opened up. Thankfully, only Big Barda, Scott-Free, and the Black Racer stepped through. However, they had bad news. Darkseid had taken Jacob, and they needed Superman's help, who was currently on Oa. There, the standoff between Mixie and Ares was palpable, and only John and Clark were able to stop them from destroying the planet. Superman then declares his intent to fight the Equation and the Guardians and Green Lanterns if need be, but that is when Cassie screams out that they aren't fighting an Equation, but Erebos himself, and the entire mood of the room changes. The Guardians went into self-preservation mode and ordered all the Green Lanterns to stand down and to protect the central battery at all costs. When Damian demanded a visual of the front lines from Ganthet, it was revealed that Kilowog's home planet, Bolavax Vic, was being attacked, and he betrayed his orders and flew to them in an instant. The Guardians' refusal to help Kilowog only increased dissension among the ranks of the Lanterns, which finally culminated in the form of Mixie offering his help in taking down Darkseid. Clark left John in charge of protecting their family and the two Earths while he went with Mixie to face Darkseid. When Kilowog, Mixie, and Superman reach the planet, Kilowog is able to feel the loneliness everyone on the planet feels. It was the most densely populated planet in the universe, with 16 billion minds, and all had the power to connect with each other. Their spirits were lifted when all the other Green Lanterns showed up for the fight after having betrayed their orders, and for once, it seemed that the tide of war would turn. But then, everything Superman stood for was perverted when the anti-living Kara, wearing the same symbol as him, punched him and then burned the family he was trying to protect to a crisp. And that wasn't all. Darkseid's Omega Beams then assaulted Superman. Mixie stopped this assault, but taking the time to wonder what he should turn Darkseid into was his biggest mistake, because the anti-living had discovered another way of infecting fifth-dimensional beings that understood life. All Darkseid had to do was hold up the infected mother box as it showed the anti-life equation to Mixie. Once Mixie was infected, he tore his face and then began to grow in size. He grew and grew until his hands could breach the atmosphere, and he started by crushing Kilowog and John into a pulp. He then took off and tore through the planet of Bolavax Vic, but he did not stop there. He aimed for Oa next and tore through its central battery. The connection to all the Green Lanterns was severed, and they lost their power. Some hurtled towards the ground where there was gravity, while others began to choke to death in the vacuum of space. At this moment, the Quintessence was discussing what they should do next, and most of the highest order beings were in favor of abandoning this universe. Most except the Spectre and the Phantom Stranger. Ganthet then tells them that the central battery has failed, and without a second thought, the Spectre leaps into action. Moments later, the connection to all the Lanterns is restored, and it's revealed that Spectre restored what Mixie broke, and this only enraged the latter further. Upon realizing what the Spectre had done, Mixie attacked him, and the fight between the Agent of Entropy and the Spirit of Vengeance began in space. DCeased, War of the Undead Gods, issue number 6, the decade-old Scream. We catch up with Lobo in this comic where he is offered 100 years of debauchery in exchange for saving the universe by the overlords of the Rylex system. He reluctantly agrees and leaves their palace in style by jumping out the high-rise tower on his bike. On the other side of the universe, however, Clark is dealing with the horrific event he has just witnessed. Another planet destroyed, 16 billion lives lost, and more friends sacrificed for nothing. Just like him, Kyle Rayner is one of the few who survived this event and has lost all hope. But when Clark locks eyes with Darkseid as he leaves through a doom tube, something emboldens inside him, and once again, Superman returns to his positivity. He looks on the good side, the fact that he and Kyle are still standing. He assures Kyle and then flies off because his eyes are currently set on the bigger threat, Mixie. And the fight between Mixie and the Spectre has reached gargantuan proportions on the other side of the universe. Planets dwarf in comparison to their size, and their sheer mass has begun breaking the fabric of reality. Black holes begin popping up around them, and though the Lanterns try to help by restraining Mixie, they're merely gnats for him on such a huge scale. And then, hell breaks loose on Earth 2 as well. John and the rest of the heroes are busy discussing how they are going to distribute the cure, when Barda notices her mother box glowing red, and Brainiac realizes the grave mistake they've made. The mother boxes are all linked to each other, and their worst fear comes true when they rush outside. A doom tube opens, and the High Father and the rest of the gods attack Earth 2. Superman and the rest of them leap into action while Lois evacuates the people and ushers them towards the arcs. But they realize that there is no escaping this assault when multiple doom tubes begin opening up around the planet. Anti-living Maxima beelines for Lois, and on the other side of the compound, anti-living Adam Strange infects Leslie Tompkins. The fight between Spectre and Mixie continues, and the latter seems to be gaining the upper hand. But this is when Clark uses all of his light years worth of momentum and punches Mixie in the face. The impact is enough to stagger the fifth dimensional being, and Spectre uses this opportunity to fatally stab him in the torso. But then he makes the mistake of calling out Erebos because the very next second, Erebos uses Mixie's powers to pluck the Spectre's host right out of him. Both the Spectre and Mixie died simultaneously, and Superman held Jim's hand as he died as well. Jim's last words to Clark were, "This universe is a miracle, Clark. Don't let it fall." Horror was also unfolding on Earth 2 as Damian and Alfred cried out for the lost Leslie Tompkins. Things only got worse when the anti-living High Father arrived to attack them, and Damian decided to fight him to buy them some time. He used a smoke bomb and punched him in the face, but the High Father, after all, was a git, and Damian was a mere mortal. He broke Damian's jaw with a single punch, and this is when Alfred stepped between the two and screamed his guts out, a scream he had held in for decades, a scream that he had been suppressing since the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne, suppressing since he was forced to kill 3 of his sons by his own hands. And this scream was heard across the universe. Another entity felt his rage, and then green energy sparked from Alfred's eyes, and his skin turned pale. Damian looked on curiously as Erebos once again screamed out in frustration through the High Father. Alfred had become the new Spectre, and the spirit of vengeance had just merged with decades-old pent-up rage. Alfred calmly said, "You will not take another son from me," and then punched his fist straight through the High Father's skull. DCeased, War of the Undead Gods. Issue number 7, Enemy of My Enemy is a Friend. The war still raged on. Ollie and Lois rallied the people of Earth 2 towards the arcs on the surface, while Lobo joined Brainiac, Cyborg, in Earth 2's orbit. Lobo promptly killed Lightray upon arrival, but things got dire when on the surface, Mr. Miracle was infected by his own son Jacob, and although Alfred had killed the High Father, Damian was still bleeding, and unfortunately, he had been infected. Cassie tried to keep him company, and in his last moments, Damian urged Alfred not to give in to his anger. This last request from a fading Batman only bolstered their resolve, and Cassie ended up subduing Maxima methodically in the very next second. The Spectre, who now possessed Alfred, calculated a plan on how he could save the world. But that is when Darkseid, Kara, and his infected Yellow Lanterns, as well as Warworld, joined the war. It was clear to the Spectre that Erebos was scared, and he knew the fight for life was being fought here on Earth 2, which is why reinforcements had arrived. And so after formulating his plan, the Spectre fled into the vastness of space as John and Brainiac took on Darkseid Earth 2's surface. Unfortunately, Brainiac fell and was infected, but instead of joining the fight, he headed straight for his ship. Erebos wanted to infect all the cities stolen by Brainiac, and the war would have ended then and there had it not been for Vic, who had anticipated this move on Erebos's part. Vic was about to decimate the infected Brainiac, but the latter got the upper hand and tried to infect Vic instead. Sadly for Erebos, he didn't know that Vic had recoded his blood, and this meant he couldn't be infected anymore. In a twist of fate, it was Vic who ended up infecting Brainiac and absorbing him. And once that was done, Vic had all the knowledge of Brainiac at his disposal, giving a much-needed idea that could turn the tide of war. He flew straight towards President Lois, just as she was about to be ambushed by the anti-living, saved her, and then demanded the city of Kandor that was handed over to her by Brainiac as a show of good faith. Right then, John stopped fighting Darkseid and flew straight into space to stop an incoming blast from the Warworld. The son of Superman took on the blast head-on and prevented Earth 2 from being decimated. And as an unconscious John fell towards Earth 2, thousands of Kryptonians from the city of Kandor rose to join the fight. Vic had reverse-engineered Brainiac's technology and had freed the citizens of Kandor. This is when Superman had arrived in the nick of time to catch his son, and so had Alfred as the beacon of hope. He had gone to Earth 1 and had brought back all of the cure batches they had stored in Magnus Labs. And then, a good 10 minutes later, Damien woke up once again and was greeted by a cured Leslie's face. Alfred had done it. He didn't give in to the rage and had instead saved the world. And the heroes tried to do what none of them had imagined themselves doing in a million years. They tried to cure Darkseid, but unfortunately, none of them were able to penetrate his skin. This is when Lobo flamboyantly arrived, took the cure, and shoved it into Darkseid's mouth as he said, "Hey Oblivion, eat my cure!" Unfortunately for Lobo, Darkseid did eat the cure and his right hand along with it. Thankfully, Lobo was a Zarnian and he would grow it back in an hour or so. But Darkseid was cured, and when he realized that he had been used as a pawn by Erebos, our heroes earned him as an unlikely ally. DCeased, War of the Undead Gods, issue number 8, An Assassin's Life. And so the war on Earth 2 was over, and every anti living in sight was cured. Mr. Miracle and Big Barda reunited with their son Jacob. Kara reunited with her parents, Kal-El, and his son. But even amidst all this, it was Batman who still hadn't let his guard down. Count on Batman to ambush death itself without being heard. But Damien wasn't attacking. He had a proposition, a plan to destroy Erebos, a plan that the Black Racer approved. And so Damien met up with Vic to develop the weapon that would destroy Erebos, and then they called out all the heroes and villains that would join them in this fight, and everyone answered. Darkseid, Lobo, the Lanterns, the Kryptonians, everyone came, and the plan was to travel to Erebos' limbo through a doom tube, and for that they would need to be dead, which is why Vic had reprogrammed the War World. They would travel in the War World to limbo, and a pulse would stop their hearts before they entered the doom tube. The same pulse would bring them back to life after the trip. Vic had programmed the pulse to match the physiology of all species, be it humans, new gods, or Zarnian. Then came the hard part. To ensure that Erebos didn't escape the weapon Vic and Damien had created, they needed to deploy it on the inside of Erebos. And to do this, they would need 2 attacks on him. One that would keep him distracted, while the other that would tear him open and allow Warworld to go inside him. Darkseid volunteered to keep Erebos' attention, but they didn't need him. They needed Ares, and Damien and Cassie goaded him into volunteering. Black Racer volunteered to join forces with Ares because death followed wherever war went, and that was when the meeting was adjourned. It was then revealed that Damien and Cassie had planned to manipulate Ares all along, but Damien's reluctance to reveal the entire plan to Cassie and having her stay here on Earth 2 while they carried out the attack told her that something was wrong, and she walked away from him. We then see John wish Damien a belated happy birthday and hand over his gift. It's a white batsuit, and it's befitting to their situation because they are going to fight the personification of darkness. Damien finds the gift to be poetic, and the next day our heroes travel through the doom tube to face Erebos. They're killed and brought back just as planned, and Ares and Black Racer keep his attention while the rest of them focus their attacks on one of his tentacles, Erebos' huge scale dwarf solar systems. So it's easy for our heroes to go unnoticed, and once Ollie has pierced his skin using Apollo's bow and quiver, the same wound is assaulted by every power at our heroes' disposal. Superman's heat vision, the power of Shazam, Darkseid's Omega beams, and the Green Lantern's light. Once the wound is big enough, Lobo jams his curved knife through it and begins opening it up, and then the rest of them pull it apart and create enough space for Warworld to fly inside. But here comes the real kicker. Vic can't access his memory of the weapon they had created once inside Erebos, and that is when Damien reveals that Bruce had managed to hack his entire system years ago because he was quite paranoid about him, and that was Damien used to wipe Vic's memory. Because you see, the weapon is Damien. He absorbed the life equation out of Vic and is sacrificing himself. Vic has one of the fastest brains in the universe right now, and it doesn't take long for him to calculate that what Damien's saying is the truth. A chain reaction between the life and anti-life equation began as soon as they entered Erebos, and Damien began glowing and fading when Vic finished his calculation. 3 minutes until both the equations reach equilibrium and birth a new universe, and though Vic wants to stay, Damien has already hacked his systems to fly him out of Erebos. And so against his will, Vic is flown away, and when he informs everyone of what Damien has done, they all begin to curse him and say their last goodbyes. Even Darkseid is impressed by Damien's ingenuity, and this is when Erebos realizes that there is light inside him, and so do our heroes, because the Doom Tube has now turned
into a boom tube. He decapitates Ares out of anger, and as the heroes leave through the boom tube, he tries to negotiate and bargain with Damien. But Damien says, "You took my father, my brothers. You hurt my friends. You took so much from our universe. There will be no bargaining, Erebos, just your end." John and Alfred fly in to keep Damien company in his last moments. Alfred expresses how proud he is of Damien, the kid that was trained to be an assassin and a killer who has now not only become the savior of one universe, but is going to be the father of another. John expresses all his love for Damien and how he will always remember him. And as they say their final goodbyes, Damien explodes into nothing but bright white light. Alfred and John use their combined super speed to fly out of there faster than light as the new universe expands, and that is how Alfred lost his last son. Cassie was unconsolable when she realized what Damien had been planning all along, and we then see Alfred alone, traveling between the two universes every now and then as he tells us that he feels the essence of Damien in each planet and star in the new universe. Marvelous verdict. The DCeased saga is one of the few storylines where everyone, including fans and critics, agree that it's an excellent take on an alternate DC universe. The art is unbelievably breathtaking and the writing is phenomenal. There is ample character growth and the story maintains an excellent pace, keeping you on the edge of your seat. Every series in the saga introduces a new threat and ups the ante without compromising its predecessor, which many modern writers find hard to do even in movies. The new Justice League is a fan favorite, and the tiny things like keeping threads tied and showing Crypto and Ace only adds to the overall experience. All in all, if you're a DC fan and like stories where zombies are done right, then we definitely recommend the DCeased saga to you.